Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be talking about my latest project, which is this clicker game that I've made. And it involves modular programming, which are these several tabs up here, and enums. The code to this project will be on my GitHub. It will also be in the description. And let's take a look at our project. So the first thing you notice if I boot it up again is you have this intro screen, and depending on which button you select, you have this hover function. So if I click on options, I can select between two characters. I'll choose Link, and I can increase and decrease the difficulty. Let's put it in the middle. You press this button to exit, which also has a hover, and we'll start the game. Now, the game, the difficulty is just changing the size of the circle. And as you can see there, I clicked 2 times, and when I failed 3 times, I have this failure screen. I can click, and it brings me back into the intro. Now let's take a look at the code. So the first thing we do is we have these Minim library, which is going to let us use these 4 sounds, which is the main theme when we're in the game, the coin sound, which is when we press on the character, the bump whenever it hits a wall, and the game over when we lose. We have 3 images, one that's 2 for each character, and 1 for whichever character is selected. And next we have the modular programming. So these are 5 modes, which I can set my variable called mode to, so that I can switch between these tabs and do certain things. We have an XYZ, which is the size of our character and its location, and we have a velocity. We have the score, which is the current game score, the high score, and the number of lives. We have the difficulty slider, which you just saw in the options. It's this right here. I can increase and decrease it. And then we have our setup. Our setup imports the images, gives a default character selection, it imports the sound files, and it sets our score and lives. We have a default X and Y, default diameter, and default velocity. In our draw function, we have a switch, which based on the mode, it's going to run different functions: the intro, the game, the pause, the game over, and the options, which are all these tabs here. So let's look at our game tab. The game tab has most of the code in this project. We have 2 variables in here, which is the streak, which lets us increase our lives, and we have new D, which is the diameter of the image based on the difficulty slider. In the beginning, we're going to play our theme, and we're going to set a background, arrange the score and lives, and then we work on our checking to see if the mouse is pressed. So once we know the mouse is pressed, we're going to set it to false so that we don't have repeating loops of continuous mouse pressed. And then we calculate to see if it's the mouse was over the character or if it's not. If it is over, it increases the score, it plays the coin sound effect and increases the streak. If it's not, it sets the streak to back to 0, and it decreases the number of lives. if we run out of lives down here, it sets our lives back to 3, and then it switches mode to game over. Once our streak, the streak again being based on this difficulty slider, once it's large enough, so in our case, by default, it's going to be 15, I believe. So this is going to check if streak is 15. So it's going to set it back to 0, and it's going to increase the number of lives. Then we have our image, increasing velocity, setting the high score based on whichever one's bigger, the current score or the previous high score. And then we have the width and height checkers. This one checks if the ball or if our character has hit the left or right sides of the screen. And it also plays the bump sound effect. If it hit the top or bottom, it reverses the y velocity and then includes a little bit of x velocity. And here we can pause using the key pressed. In our game over tab, we have we're pausing and rewinding the theme. We're playing the game over sound. We are setting our background to this dark red. We're checking to see if the mouse is pressed so we can set it to intro, and then we have the text that tells us that we've lost. In our intro, we have 4 variables. One that chooses color. So if you see when I scroll over this game start button, the stroke becomes blue. So that's these two, the stroke weight play and the stroke color play. And if I go over the options, the same thing happens, and that's these 2 variables. It's going to rewind and pause our game over. It's going to, by default, set the stroke weight and the stroke color to black and stroke weight of 1. It's going to reset our X and Y of the character, and then it's going to check to see if we're hovering or pressing the button. Once we know it hovers, it changes the stroke weight and the stroke color. And once we know if pressed, it goes to the appropriate mode. Down here it creates the stroke, the play button, and down here it creates the options button. Then it creates the text, the title, the 2 names of each buttons, and that's about it for this one. The options has a few more buttons. It has 4 variables. One that chooses, the first one chooses the hover of the button. You see when I go over it, it makes the stroke weight a little bit thicker. It has a hover and selection for both of these characters, and by default it changes the Mario selection to 255 because our selected image, which is the image that appears in-game, is by default Mario. So down here we have setting the slider. So we have the hover and selection. By default, we're going to set both hovers to 1. We're going to select the slider and back hover to 1, and the link hover and Mario hover, which is the thickness, to 0. Here we have the slider, which is based on, again, mouse X, depending on where the mouse is on this line. If I move it out, it doesn't work. Here we have the back button hover, which is just this. these two are the Mario and Link hover, which are these. Here we have the two images, the two characters which are placed inside the boxes. Down here we have the note stroke, and then we're creating a box, a faint gray box over both of them, but we only do it according to this Mario hover, which is the alpha. So for both Mario and Link. And then we have our selection. If this one's selected, this one is going to be 255. So it's going to show the little rectangle around it. And only one of these can be selected, so that's why we set them up there to 0 by default. Here we have the slider and the button for the slider, the text, and the back button down here. In pause, we don't have much. We pause the theme, we set the background to white, and we have a little text that says press mouse to continue game. Once the mouse is pressed, we set the mode to game. And that's about it. Thank you for watching.